Good afternoon, dear audience. I'm very happy to introduce my today's special guest, who is the chief editor of and actually the head of Visegrad think tank, Mr. Wojciech Przybylski. Good evening, Mr. Przybylski.
Yes, good evening to you, Mihайло. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining this session. Really, it's a proud to take an interview from you. So then you can communicate not only to the residents of Odessa, but also to different viewers, because our TV channel covers the whole Odessa region. So, Mr. Wojciech, let's speak about the situation which is now in European Union, generally on European continent, due to the war situation in Ukraine, Russian invasion, etc. So how can you assess now the level of support which exists towards Ukrainian refugees, generally towards Ukraine, bearing in mind that there are many experts right now in Europe and United States who act on behalf of Russia and who tries to convince audience that there is no reason to support Ukraine. So how can you assess now, let's say, the mood of society and mood of European political elite? Are they still stand in front of Ukraine in order to support Ukraine?
Yes, there is a firm support for Ukrainian refugees. First of all, there is still a high level of solidarity in the society. So if you look at the most recent numbers, the biggest number of refugees from Ukraine are currently displaced in Poland, but they are also in Germany, in Spain, in Italy, across also Central European countries. So all of Europe is supportive for the first of all for the human tragedy, and they want to provide shelter. Then secondly, what you have, which is also important for the Ukrainian war effort, all of European Union is supporting arms exports to Ukraine. Actually, because of Ukraine, European Union has enabled so-called peace initiative, which is funding arms exports delivered by different countries. So all European countries contribute with their budgets, with the common European budget, to the arms exports to Ukraine. That's unprecedented, and it is only likely to be continuously increased and supported along the support of the United States, which is now considering adding new types of military equipment to the Ukrainian army. And what you asked about, the trolling or the disinfo narratives that seek to undermine the Ukrainian position in the public opinion across the West, that is present. It is manifested in many subversive ways. Most recent reports that we hear about is about all the arms supply getting into the hands of criminals or smugglers, illegally using this without any control. So there are dangerous spots on the disinformation map regarding the joint solidarity efforts, but there is less of a buy-in for this narrative, especially with the vast reporting that is being currently Europe and the United States altogether.
Mr. Przybylski, during the last 2 years, we saw different crises which occurred in European Union, and actually it revealed that European Union lacks coherence. So, for instance, when there was a coronavirus, European states, they preferred to adopt measures actually their own measures, and they did not. So it was very hard to negotiate, and it was very hard to agree between the different European states regarding measures which had to be adopted in order to tackle coronavirus. So pretty much the same we see now in the European Union in the framework of Ukrainian crisis, because, for instance, Poland is very eager to help Ukraine, and Poland is doing her best in order to help Ukraine, comparing to some other European states which have their own perspective on the conflict. And some of the states, they are very open for the cooperation with Russia, even though Russia invaded part of Ukrainian territory. And now Minister for International Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, is speaking about, let's say, widening the geographical limits of the conflict. Even though we know that Russia came to invade the whole Ukraine, now Russia speaks directly without any hesitations about this. Still, Russia enjoys some support from some European states. So what do you think? Which conclusions can be made in terms of European integration? How to overcome this divergence in opinions which exist between Eastern European states and Western European states, which didn't have an experience to be under Russian influence?
Well, look, the countries that clearly support the Russian agenda are countries at the same time that have experienced the Russian soldiers' boots on their grounds and on the necks of their ancestors. And this country is Hungary, for instance. I mean, as we speak, we are seeing the pictures from yesterday's visit of Mr. Siarto to Moscow, where he shook hands with Lavrov as if nothing happened, and smiled. Problem with the fact that for over a year, the information services, the email systems, IT systems of his very own ministry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, were penetrated by Russian hackers, getting access to information which is sensitive, critical diplomatic information. And yet he was willingly, knowing that, he was willingly accepting the highest order of merit from the Russian state just before the war in Ukraine. And it doesn't mean that there is no direct interest really between Hungary as a country and the position on Ukraine. It's a problem of a particular government that has captured the national interest and made it a particular kleptocratic state. It's a criminal case rather than a geopolitical case, what we observe in Hungary, and with some countries at risk of being taken over by kleptocracy leadership. It may be a bigger problem in across Europe, because some other countries may also fall victim of similar clique of politicians whose main driving interest is actually to capture the resources and capture the economic benefits of a given country. So you know it very well also from Ukraine. You used to have politicians who would, without hesitation, flirt with Russia, which were not the Ukrainian interest, in fact. So what can we say? I mean, Europe's effort to secure democracy and secure internally from kleptocratic, which undermine the rule of law or live off undermine the rule of law, is the number one priority for Europe, that Europe is striving for, is making steps from the European Parliament, the Commission, the pressure of members of Europe to have that. Having that, of course, but the clear assessment of what's going on right now as the illegal criminal war also is happening, as we know, this is basic, not to mention killing and terrorizing the innocent civilians. That position of any decent country, regardless of the different small caveats regarding common past and culture, this would be just there is just one position, which is the standing in solidarity with Ukrainians.
Mr. Brzezowski, you are a chairman of Visegrad think tank. So Visegrad group was formed actually in 1991, and actually it was formed. It consists of Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. So all these four states, they were a member of, let's say, Comecon, yeah. So organization which was led by Soviet Union, and actually it was a part of let's say occupation program, how Soviet Union occupied the states. And when the Soviet Union collapsed to the states, they declared that they want to join European Union, and actually they concluded European agreements and they started their way to join European Union. Now we see that there are different opinions within the Visegrad group, and we see that Hungary preserves the policy. Hungary actually and partially Slovakia preserved the policy which contradicts, let's say, basic values which was declared in 1991. So do you think is still a Visegrad group, let's say, an effective organization, or it's more a historical phenomena and it is outdated, and now it can't undertake all aims, goals, which are on the front line of European integration?
Yeah. Let me begin by saying that the Visegrad group approach to the very complex term and very unspecified term of what Central Europe, sometimes Central Eastern Europe, has been called in the past. And it offers a particular, very simple answer to the definition of Central Europe, which always existed on the map and will continue to exist regardless of what happens to the Visegrad group. The answer was to take the states, nation states, which have their agency in defining their European direction. And that moment that you referred to historically in 1991 was preceded by a common effort of these countries. Please mind that at that time there was no Slovakia or Czech Republic. It was one state, Czechoslovakia. The effort of three countries, from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, and from Poland, was to coordinate the withdrawal of the Red Army. And the common understanding of the three was backed by a common diplomatic experience. We were, of course, very fortunate that it all happened very peacefully. But this common experience of standing on the direction towards the West was pretty clear to all of the leadership that set up the so-called Visegrad group. And Visegrad group turned out to be also a vehicle to join NATO, that's number one, and then to join the European Union. After which, there were many voices that said, well, now it should be disbanded because it's neither an organization. Visegrad Group is not an organization. It's neither a competition to European Union or NATO. It's neither like a group, like I don't know, it's not a federation or anything.
So basically, Visegrad Group are more like BRICS, for instance. So it's not institutionalized, it's more like a club.
It's a club, essentially. And there are many clubs, and that's we only discovered as generally in the political establishment, it was discovered only later on. It's one of many, many clubs that European Union is composed of. And they're overlapping clubs. So there is the institutional form of European Union, and there are many clubs like Benelux, Nordic, Franco-German, Alpine, Danube clubs. There are multiple clubs, including Eurozone club, including, well, that's a bit more formalized because it's part of the institutional European Union setup. And what we learned also through the crisis of 2009, the Visegrad Group can be particularly influential and important in coordinating our European policies within. So this club prevails. And in addition to that, it also manifests on the ground in these countries by a very small budget of and the pool of projects, but still very meaningful, run by the Visegrad Fund. This is it's also a template for many activities in so-called Eastern Partnership and in the Western Balkans to animate neighborhoodly, collaboration and relationships. So it's sort of, on one side, it's been a kindergarten for the real stuff, which is the EU and NATO, to build up nation identity and positioning within these bigger organizations, to grow up to be able to deliver as members. And on the second level tier of achievement, you would say, Visegrad Group has been a useful lobby group that has been completely undermined by the policies of Viktor Orban, who used it for his own national policy defense against being irrelevant, because he was becoming irrelevant because of the democratic backsliding in the European Union. And he got a big gift, big present in the form of Polish elections. When he got, he got Mr. Kaczynski to fall in love with him and to agree to be used and to use Polish national interest to shield Hungarian national interest. I don't know what was the trade-off internally. We will read it. We will have to investigate it. Probably in the archives, this will be one of the major blows to the national interest of Poland. But in the long run, it will also be irrelevant in a way because it didn't hold. It cannot hold. Last but not least, I would add that there is a precedent within the Visegrad Group that holds or can help uphold this pro-Western institutional and democracy-building direction. And that was the case of Slovakia under another kleptocratic, autocratic regime by Mr. Mečiar. Mr. Mečiar, in the beginnings, after the divorce between Czechs and Slovaks, held Slovakia captive with his anti-democratic policies. And so Visegrad Group also kept an open space for Slovakia to join in and to, again, full Central Europe. Because Central Europe or Visegrad was not complete without Slovakia, but at the same time, Slovakia had to feel that it doesn't belong even to Central European club, not to mention European club, and that created a pressure point on the Slovak elites, but also some guidance where they need to go and who is there to help them, as the closest neighbors always do, in building up the common European house.
Obviously, it's very difficult to try to judge the past from, let's say, today's framework. And obviously, this is a kind of political speculation, but still, I think that it's high time to make some conclusions even about EU policy towards Russia during the last several decades. And it seems that Mr. Putin was quite comfortable for the West because European leaders, they thought that actually what Putin is doing, he's simply disseminating some words which he uses just to turn down all the freedoms in Russian. And Europeans were quite cynical about this. You can do everything you want. This is actually a responsibility and the destiny of Russian people. So we don't need to interfere in, let's say, Russian internal policy. But as now we see, after 20 years being a president of Russia, Putin now represents the danger to European order. And obviously, it's a question to ask about responsibility of Ms. Merkel, other politicians who were in charge of the whole Europe during the last 20 years. Poland used to be always, let's say, Ukraine's attorney, and advocated Ukraine to join European Union and especially to join North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Do you think that if NATO granted membership, or at least a membership plan to Georgia and Ukraine, it would be possible to avoid Russian invasion into both the states?
There was a clear commitment and the reform done on the sides of, on behalf of Ukraine also in moving towards NATO. If, in other words, Ukraine was really ready to fulfill the criteria, then probably we would also have a different situation. So this question, if it's turning to, political fiction of what if, what would happen if?
But Mr. Przybylski, I'm very sorry for interrupting you, but we now see, even from EU Commission statement regarding Georgia, that actually, if you compare Georgian reforms and Ukrainian reforms, they're pretty much the same, but the European Union decided to grant Ukraine and Moldova candidate status and abandoned candidate status for Georgia. Why? Because of political reasons. The same, NATO decided to grant membership for Finland and Sweden, even though they went above the procedure, they didn't receive any membership plan, etc. They were accepted to NATO during the several months. And Ukraine was waiting to join the NATO for about 20, 15 years. And always we hear about reforms, etc. So obviously, many decisions in European Western policy is done on unjustified basis, let's say.
Finland and Sweden, let's start to unpack point by point. Finland and Sweden have been participating in Partnership for Peace initiative, which is essentially a road to NATO initiative for quite some time, being at the same time not from their own side declared candidate states, but they were perfectly integrating their direction towards NATO from within. And the moment they declared they want to join, they were already compatible with the munition, they were compatible with the coordination of NATO exercises. So their decision was a complementary step in very specific circumstances. Here I agree with you that in these given circumstances, there was no other option also for the West, for generally Europe, but also the transatlantic alliance, to make other decision than to back them fully in their move, because this is a moment of new opening in terms of the security architecture for Europe. Point about the architecture, European architecture. There is no European security system anymore. There is no Helsinki Accord. There is no OSCE mission really viable in the given context. And it's not so scary for the European Union as much as for its neighborhood, and especially also Central Asia, to understand. So everybody is still not admitting that, but clearly this is one big push for the other prevailing 20th century organizations, which is NATO and EU, to make steps to secure whatever it is to secure in the European order, which was simply destroyed by Russia of Mr. Putin. And in that circumstance, any country that displays a direction towards the reforms, a direction that is backed, not just by the leadership, but really truly by the general public's effort. And you cannot really overestimate how much Ukraine and Ukrainians have paid for this direction and for this possibility to make this long expected from the Polish side, long expected step towards commitments to this direction. And when it was done and when it was realized, there was no way for European Union to say no. This would be, I would say, the end of European Union. If European Union would say no to Ukraine in that situation, this would mean succumbing to the Russian pressure in the bigger game on the European continent, because it would be giving up the peace project that Europe is also about, European Union is also about, which is creating the sphere, geographical area in which stability and peace prevails for unprecedented amount of time, also on our continent. So these are the points I would underline as the key points that were decisive for the European decision about now expanding. But before, can I ask you, Frank, I mean, where was Ukraine so committed before 2014, for instance, to this direction? Was the Ukrainian public opinion and also the administration so on the right side into the direction? Was it such a clear cut? It was a little bit too wishy-washy. These were tragic developments. I was literally scared in 2014 when Ukraine was not even able to defend itself when Russians were picking apart some of its territory. And I was only reassured personally. I felt like reassured that not all is lost, and actually Europe is much stronger project in all senses when Ukrainians fought for their freedom and for their independence, and then essentially for a European setup on the Ukrainian territory. And that gives the whole rationale of why now and not earlier, and why there was no other possibility also for European Union to accept that. Regarding NATO, I think there will be many considerations, many options, but I think it's worth to remember that many people advocated a Finland way for Ukraine for many years, right? Of where Ukraine should go in terms of NATO or its security setup. I would clearly back up these voices today, saying, yeah, Ukraine should definitely follow Finnish way in this approach.
Mr. Trubisky, I would like to ask you the last question, last but not the least, as generally said. Obviously, there are different now views on Ukraine-Russian war in the European Union, and it seems to me that there is no single understanding in Europe what will be the victory for Ukraine and for the European Union, for the West in this war. Some people think that the victory will be if Russia will be back to the border which existed before the February 24. Some people think that Ukraine's victory and the general Western victory will be when Ukraine restored all its territorial sovereignty and independence according to its international borders of 1981. So what, as an expert, you personally think will be, let's say, can be the victory? What you will personally treat as a victory? The first option or the second option? What do you think? Or do you think if we try to, let's say, think realistically and justify the situation realistically?
First of all, I do not see a possibility how we can call this war victorious. Victory, definitely, whatever victory means, will be defined by Ukrainians for two reasons. One reason is that Russia is unable to establish conditions of peace. It is no longer a power able to project any arrangements that will be internationally honored. Its power relies only in projecting chaos. And by projecting chaos, you cannot set up parameters of victory, which ultimately it always means peace. We do not have a conviction, and I can't imagine anyone would, that Russia will be a guarantor of peace, will be a country to be able to provide peace for a long term of time. So we are dealing with a country that is not willing, that could have capacity to establish the conditions of victory, but will not, because it will never be able to say there is enough. So that leaves Ukraine with the possibility of establishing the conditions of victory. It's not going to be easy because of the human and material loss that you have experienced. Any victory will be very bitter. It's hard to speak of victory when you see the obliterated towns and villages and so many people dead or terribly injured. So it's more of a, to me, it's more of a situation in Ukraine will say, this is what we can protect and, peacefully maintain from the outward chaos. And these are the conditions that Ukraine will be able to deliver on its own. With the support, with all the help it may receive, it will be in the hands of Ukraine. And that will be the reality on the ground. This will be supported to a large extent by the efforts from the European community and definitely from Ukraine's neighbors. We will be looking forward to that moment, really. But
Mr. Zhivulsky, then let me change a little bit my question. So I would like to rearrange my question. So we know that Ukraine is strongly dependent upon military assistance of the West, and it's very important in order to tackle Russian aggression. So the question is about an extent, because obviously the West sacrifices economically, financially, energetically in order to help Ukraine. So what is, in your opinion, is the West ready to accept the scenario when the war will last till the full restorance of Ukrainian territorial integrity, which means returning back the annexed Crimea Peninsula, for instance, and the whole Donbas region? Will we see the full support from the West, or Western politicians see as their own aim to sacrifice and support Ukraine until Ukraine comes back and situation comes back to the border of 24th of February?
The dynamics, because it's a long war, this is not going to happen in 1 year. Of course, you cannot exclude that, but most likely this is not going to happen in 1 year. This is multi-year effort that at some point may stall. And when it stalls, that doesn't mean even ceasefire, but there are certain wars, as you know, with Russia that are continuously open. They're just not hot. This is the reality of some of the wars. This is even here, we don't have a legal status of a war, but this open aggression can be happening at any moment, while at the same time it may go quiet at some points. And these will be the moments definitely during also the electoral cycles when part of the European public will be tired with the effort, will be not committing as much. But rest assured that there is also an institutional level, the decision-making that has been there, that will not be withdrawn by European Union. And again, the European Union, not the member states and public opinion, is also one of the key elements in this whole operations. Because once agreed on support towards Ukraine with the use of, frankly speaking, relatively minor resources, in terms of of how much money is being spent by European Union to compensate the arms delivery, not to mention individual member state support. This is all going to be continuing with various fluctuation and of course possibilities, but it's also an element of a bureaucratic setup, which once put into practice is very hard also put into place, is also very hard to stop, because someone would need to really strongly argue against, but if someone starts to strongly argue against, there is usually the countermeasure, the defending of the unity from the other member states and from the institutions themselves. So fluctuation, yes. Full support. It will go on. It will not stop.
Mr. Przybylski, I'm very grateful that you agreed to participate in our today's show at Media Inform TV channel, which will be also broadcasted on YouTube. Thank you very much. So, Mr. Wojciech Przybylski, who is the chairman of Visegrad think tank. Thank you very much, Mr. Przybylski, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kacin. Mihайло, good to see you.